The making of Mjolnir. For this story to work, you need to know about Sif. The problem is, there isn't much to know about her. We know she's Thor's wife, and we know she's called Sif, which means who is in a relation by marriage, who is bound by family ties. Which basically means that she's a wife called wife. That's it. That's all we know. We don't even know what she's the goddess of. It seems she's an earth and fertility goddess, because that's the job every Lady Aesir gets given. I mean, Freya is a fertility goddess, as well as Frigg, and even Frey is a fertility god. And we've seen Thor has some links to fertility, what with him being linked to rain and thunder to make things grow, and Mjolnir being linked to wedding celebrations. So yes, being a fertility god doesn't really make you unique. Oh wait, another thing we know about Sif. She has beautiful golden hair, and maybe it's got something to do with great fields of wheat and healthy crops. And of course, we know that one day, Loki cut off her hair. Now, Loki cutting off Sif's hair might seem a bit hard, because who would want to bully this poor girl who is no one special? Mostly people assume it was just a bit of mischief, but it could mean a lot more than that. At the time, cutting a woman's hair was a sign of disgrace and adultery. Later on, in the Lucasena, Loki will boast that only one man has ever been able to cuckold the great god Thor, and that is him, the humble Loki. So maybe Loki cutting off Sif's hair means a lot more than a bit of playful naughtiness. Maybe he was sending out a message to Thor and to the Aesir, saying they had been lucky enough to sleep in Sif's bed. And of course, if Sif's hair does symbolise wheat and plants and generally stuff growing, then cutting it off would make the ground barren. It would condemn Midgard to famine and years of bad harvests. Anyway, Sif woke up one morning to find her hair had been cut off, whatever else that might mean. She cried out to Thor, and Thor, in the great Aesir tradition, rushed to Loki and shouted, "This is all your fault!" And this time, it just happened to be true. "Maybe you should ask yourself what it means," said Loki. "Maybe I should break every bone in your body," said Thor. Loki changed his mind. "Maybe I should find a solution then." "Yes, maybe you should." And Thor let Loki go, at the condition he found new hair for Sif. Loki decided to go and ask the dwarves for help. The dwarves live in Svartalfheim or Nidavellir. In the same way giants aren't particularly big, dwarves aren't particularly small. But yes, before you comment, I've drawn the dwarves smaller than everyone else, because I'm speciesist. Dwarf, dvergar, means deformed, bent. They're great smiths, and they live underground. They were first maggots eating through Ymir's flesh, and when Ymir's body became the earth, they lived in the tunnels they'd dug through him. So they're charming people, as you can see. Loki went to see Ivaldi's sons, who were famous dwarven blacksmiths. He said to them, "Hi guys, this is your lucky day. You want to prove to the gods you're the best metal workers in the whole 9 worlds? Well, here's your chance. Make Sif some new hair, and in a week, it will be the big thing. Every Aesir will come and buy their magical items off you." "Sounds good," said the eldest of Ivaldi's son. "We'll throw in some presents for Odin and Frey into the bargain, to impress them." "Good man," said Loki, and he left rubbing his hands. He was feeling rather pleased with himself. But his conversation had been overheard by Brock and Sindri. Brock literally means metal worker, and Sindri means spark sprayer. So as you can guess, metallurgy was their trade, and they weren't happy to hear Ivaldi's sons would soon be stealing their clients off them. "Why did you go to Ivaldi's sons rather than to us?" complained Sindri. Because they're better than you," answered Loki. "They're not," said Brock. "Prove it," said Loki. "They're making 3 presents for Odin, Frey and Sif. I bet my head that you can't do better than that." Loki had no idea who Brock was, but he didn't like backing down. "I bet my head we can, and we will," said Brock. The 2 brothers left to go and make the presents for the Aesir. At first Loki felt quite confident. After all, he would be bringing back 6 presents to the gods, nothing less. But then he started wondering if betting his head on something as random as Brock's talent as a blacksmith wasn't such a smart idea after all. "Maybe I should just check his presents aren't too good," he thought. Now Loki could turn into a fly, but not a small, easily squashed under a swatter fly, rather a great, big, can draw blood if it bites horsefly. So he transformed into a fly, and found his way into Brock and Sindri's workshop. Brock was working the bellows, and Sindri wasn't doing much, except throwing stuff on the fire and waiting for it to take shape. First, Sindri put the skin of a pig on the fire. He told Brock to keep working on the bellows, because if he didn't, the work would be ruined. "And I'm not the one with my head on the line," added Sindri. Then Sindri left to go grab a beer, while the magic worked itself out. Loki flew up to Brock and bit him as hard as he could on the hand, but Brock kept pushing the bellows regularly. When Sindri came back, he pulled out of the fire a great golden boar. "Wow," said Brock. Even Loki was impressed. The boar was not only made of gold, It was alive. Yeah, said Sindri, it does that. Then he threw some gold into the fire and went off for another beer. Loki, who was starting to worry, perched on the back of Brock's neck. He bit him twice as hard as before, but in vain. When Sindri came back, he pulled a golden ring out of the fire. Just a ring? That's kinda disappointing, considering you can do live pigs, said Brock. This is Draupnir, said Sindri. New rings will drip out of it. It's an eternal source of gold. Nice, said Brock. Loki was getting really anxious. Then Sindri threw some iron into the fire. Now don't mess up this one, he said to his brother. This is the most delicate piece. And he went back to the pub. Loki flew up to Brock and perched on his eyelid. He bit him so hard he drew blood. And, despite his brother's recommendation, Brock had to lift his hand and wipe the blood out of his eyes before he could keep working the bellows. When Sindri came back, he pulled a hammer out of the fire and cried out in dismay. Did you stop for a moment? This is nearly ruined. It looks okay to me, said Brock. The handle's too short, grumbled Sindri, but it'll have to do. So the dwarves went back with Loki to meet the gods, Ivaldi's sons holding their gifts, Brock and Sindri carrying theirs. When they arrived before Odin, Brock was careful to mention that the Aesir had to choose the best gifts and decide which dwarf was the best craftsman. Ivaldi's son had brought Sif a magical golden wig. Once she put it on, the wig became real hair and grew like real hair, except that it was of pure gold. They had brought Frey a boat which he could fold up and put in his pocket, and then unfold when he needed it. They called it Skidbladnir, which means assembled from thin pieces of wood, because they had no imagination. And they gave Odin his lance Gungnir. The lance would always touch its mark, however far you threw it from. These were wonderful gifts, especially the boat, because it's really practical to be able to carry your Drakkar over land. Brock and Sindri had made Draupnir, which we've already talked about, and they gave it to Odin. They gave Frey the magical gold boar, which they called Gyllenbursti. It means golden bristled, golden haired. Yeah, the dwarves aren't very good at names. Because it was golden, it shone brightly, and you could ride it by day or by night, because it would always light the path in front of you. So that was practical. And last but not least, they gave the hammer to Thor. Now, I know the handle's a bit short, said Sindri, but this hammer will never break, it can be made smaller or bigger at will, and it comes back if you throw it. Oh, and it can help you do lightning. We call it Mjolnir. That sounds like it might come in useful, said Thor. Yeah, but the handle's a bit short really, said Loki. Sort of ruins the whole thing. But despite Loki's efforts, the gods all felt that really, this beautiful hammer was the most wonderful thing they'd seen, and Brock and Sindri were the best craftsmen they had ever met. When they said this, Loki said, "Okay, that's me out," and he immediately flew away as fast as he could. How he flew is subject to debate. It seemed he had magical shoes on, which allowed him to walk through air. But as far as I can tell, these shoes are never mentioned in any other myth, and whenever Loki needs to fly, he uses Freya's falcon form. But, one way or another, Loki flew out into the sky and out of reach. Brock explained to Thor that he'd made a bet with Loki, and asked for the Thunderer's help. Thor used his magical goats, and they pulled his chariot into the air and after Loki. I really need to tell you more about these goats at some point. But anyway, Thor caught Loki and dragged him back to the dwarves. "Dude, you have no gratitude," said Loki. "I've just brought you 6 presents and you give me to this guy who wants to cut off my head." "To be fair, he brought us the presents," said Thor. "And you should pay people for their good work." "Yeah, like the builder of the Asgard walls, you mean?" Loki could be quite cutting when he wanted to. Brock took out his axe and ordered Loki to kneel so he could cut off his head. "You're not going to help?" Loki asked Odin. Odin shrugged. As I've said before, Loki works best under pressure. He fought nearly as quickly as he could fly, and spurted out, "Wait, Brock, I gave you my head, but I never gave you my neck. You can have my head, by all means, but I want my neck to stay unharmed." As I've said, dwarves aren't very creative, so Brock couldn't find a way to get Loki's head without touching his neck. In the end, feeling very annoyed, he said, "Okay, I own a head that's too smart for its own good. I'll sew its lips, so at least it'll keep quiet, if nothing else." Brock used his knife to do holes through Loki's lips, but his knife wouldn't cut. "Try this," said Sindri, who was rather enjoying the show. He gave his brother an awl, and with it Brock sewed Loki's lips. He sewed them together with a thread called unyielding, and Loki couldn't cut it. He had to pull the thread out and rip his lips to get rid of it, which left his mouth ragged and scarred. That is why Loki is sometimes called the scar-lipped god. And that is how Thor got his hammer, and Odin his ring and spear, and how whenever the gods gain goods and riches, there is always a Jotunn somewhere paying for it. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you've got any questions, please feel free to check out the Facebook page or to leave a comment. See you all next week!